Hello, my name is Dylan Palmer,
And I'm Daniel Vadala.
and this is our encrypted chat client server project. As you can see here, this is our server code. We went with a multi-threaded approach. It uses a Diffie-Hellman code to first transfer keys get a shared key between the client and the server. It to later use that key for the AES encryption. Um, This is the client side where during the setup, it uses that uh, Diffie-Hellman to transfer keys, and also it gets a client ID to make sure that each message is properly identified.
And then once we have the key, then we go and we encrypt using AES. And then, so we use this Python library, AES from Cryptodrome, to then encrypt and decrypt all of our messages and using that key that we get from Diffie-Hellman. So on the server side, what we do is after the key exchange, based off that client ID we've generated, we save um, the key based off the client. And the way we did it was with a client ID was so we can have multiple clients on the same IP. So when you get the server receives the messages from a client, it then decrypts it using that client's encryption key, and then before it sends it out to the other clients, it re-encrypts using the new client's encryption key based off the encryption keys we've saved on the server side.
As for how the server actually works, it runs two threads. One to start looking for actual incoming connections, and once the connection is made and the socket is connected, it then waits for a message from the client to then run a while loop for taking messages from the client and broadcasting them to all other clients that exist. And as Daniel mentioned, it strips the encryption from the that it was encrypted by the client, and then encrypts it to the client with the encryption of the client it is sending it to.
So what we did was we created a UI. So I'll start up the server now so we can start our demo and explain it as we go. So we use Python to do all this. So we're using Python commands. So we'll start up our TCP server. Once we do this, I'll start up our UI page. So to start off, what we did was we created a small login page where the user can log in using an existing password or create a new password. We attempted to pass in a server address if we want to connect to another server besides just localhost like we're going to use here to test with. We've had some troubles with that, connecting our computers based off our local Wi-Fi's, not allowing us to connect to each other. But if we had a proper server that allowed connections, we could use this to connect to this actual server from our clients instead of just all doing it locally. But for now, we're going to test with locally. So I'm going to use an existing password. And you can see I typed in the wrong password, which was not on purpose, but a good demonstration that our passwords are encrypted and then compared when we try to log in. All right. So now we have our actual Messenger app here, which just saves and sends messages to the server, which then sends it out to the other client. So I'm actually going to start up two. So I'm going to start up another client. Whenever we log in, of course, when I go to present, I can never remember my passwords, even if it's a recording, not in front of people.
It's
Okay.
the curse of presentation.
So now we have our two chat clients, which open every time you open up a UI, it creates a new client. So now, in one client, I'm going to send a test message. and now you can see that the other client received it. So we have our username here. So this user is Daniel, and then this one should be Daniel2. Now we can see that Daniel2 is put in the chat, and on both sides, both clients now receive the messages. So like we were saying earlier, each client has its own encryption key that we get from Diffie-Hellman. It then encrypts the message before sending it to the server, which is running in the background here. We have a few print statements to try to figure out what was going on. It encrypts it, sends it to the server. The server then decrypts it and re-encrypts it for this client, who then decrypts it again once it receives the encrypted message from the server, and then displays it here on the UI. Okay.
So part of the process was taking the UI that existed and turning it into an actual client. To make it as into an actual client, we needed to have some setup code, and also the receive and send messages needed to not only display onto the actual chat windows, which they were already doing, but also actually send through the server. Which this code looks the same as it did before, but now it actually sends through the server, which is a funny thing to say, is that we got the same results as we did before, but now it does something different.
Yeah, the way we
But
split up this project, I'll say, is I worked on the encryption and then created the UI, while Dylan worked more on the server side. So one of the challenges was, once we both had those two things up and running, was integrating them together, which of course is never an easy task. So a good way to do it was to integrate the client side with the Messenger UI itself. So once it starts up a UI, it creates the client, which then connects to the server.
yeah, so what during the process, we ended up switching from a normal client to multi-threaded to create a better packaging, and so that we could get a better process for sending and receiving messages, and so that when we are going through the process, it was actually doing what we wanted it to. When we weren't using the multi-threaded, it was kind of I'm losing it here. It was it was not. It was too loose. Sorry, I lost it there.
You're good. We'll just keep going. So another big challenge we had was, obviously we mentioned earlier, connecting these clients to the server itself was always a challenge. We would get one working, but then multi-clients was always a challenge. So like Dylan said, we were using multi-threading to try to connect multiple clients, which in Python was easier than we thought. We just had to import a library and spin it up. I can show that code off real quick just to make it clear. So we started a thread here that says handle client, and then the handle client just receives messages. So every single client we created a new thread which would receive messages for that client. Another issue was, for having both on the same local system, was both clients were running on the same IP, same port. So we had to figure out a way to differentiate them, which is why we came up with just generating a client ID, just to differentiate between multiple clients on the same host. And then obviously we tried to get our separate connections to work, which in theory this should work with multiple connections if our Wi-Fi's and network security systems of our local Wi-Fi systems would work. We can connect to each other and use this to message. Another challenge we tried was encrypting files and trying to send them. which was a more difficult task than we initially thought. We spent some time trying to encrypt files, and we got basic files to work, like TXT files. I can actually go to the code here. We got encrypt files, which takes in a file and kind of chunks it out and encrypts it part by part. We got this working for simple files like text files, CSV files, like XMLs, all those text-based files, but then more complicated files like um, Word document files or PDFs were more complicated, so we didn't get that far. And then, so that would kind of be part of potential future work for this project, would be trying to get files to be encrypted and then sent. We didn't get to the chance to get files to actually be sent through our TCP server, but future work, definitely something we would like to look into to get this in a better state. Yeah.
No, we managed to get a lot done and get this further than we thought. But the actual sending of files through the server was more difficult than we anticipated. So.
Yeah. So, it's kind of in conclusion, we were able to create our secure messenger, use Diffie-Hellman to pass keys back and forth and ensure encryption with those keys. And now I'm rambling, but.
And then use AES to ensure that the actual messages themselves were encrypted.
Yeah. So we use two core principles of network security, of encrypting and then Diffie-Hellman key exchange, and then just use all the Python libraries such as sockets. We used Pickle for encoding messages. Yeah, we were able to create a little chat client. All right. And then this is normally the part where we say any questions, but this is a recording probably listened to by a professor or a TA. So we will end it here and say if you have any questions, feel free to email us or anything like that. All right.
I hope you enjoyed our presentation.
Yeah, thank you.